Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of GIANT's Healthy Innovators Live TV. My name is Barry Shrier. I'm your host, and I'm the founder of GIANT Health. GIANT is an acronym which stands for Global Innovation and New Technology. Every week, we do these live TV shows to bring to you a collection of the most interesting and dynamic and ambitious people who are leading innovation in healthcare around the world. So this week, we have Tobias from McKinsey. Hello, Tobias. How are you?
Hello, very well. Thanks for having me, Barry. And not sure whether you can see my blushing about the dynamic, ambitious, etc. But I hope it's not coming across too much.
Well, look, we are huge fans of all the work that you and McKinsey are doing in healthcare, and very, very keen to learn more about that in today's discussion. However, to begin with, I just want to thank all of our many thousands of viewers from around the world. And I want to encourage everybody to like this YouTube film and also to subscribe. We're ambitious to build up our community. As everybody knows, GIANT is a global community of nearly 200,000 people around the world. Everybody whose business is healthcare and tech and innovation. So if you subscribe to these YouTube videos, that will help us to grow the community and to serve everybody in our healthcare innovation ecosystem. So Tobias, we'd love to hear a little bit about you personally. How did you get to where you are right now? If you're agreeable, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background and your journey, please.
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me again. Well, I guess originally I should start with I'm a biochemist, immunologist. So I did a little bit of cancer immunology research when that was still a very strange thing to do. Things have changed in the meantime. I've been now for 12 years with McKinsey, and all my work is in the healthcare innovation space. So I usually work either on product development or R&D type of topics, or then on bringing innovation into markets, scaling innovation, business building, etc.
Brilliant.
And I guess I'm very fortunate, and I'm very grateful also that I can do this work. Because for me, it's pretty much, a lot more than a job. It's pretty much my favorite topic. A few years ago, since you asked about the personal story, a few years ago, a lot has happened within a short time frame, including both of my kids being born, as well as my father passing away with cancer. And so that time really, for me, felt like half time of my life, Barry. So I used to play football, right? So there is a first half, and then there is a second half, and then there's a break in between. And I've actually thought about it like that, in particular at that time when sort of I switched from being the son and having a father to being the father and having a son. And I actually thought about what would I find meaningful for the second half of my career, and being a biochemist and cancer researcher originally, having had several cases of cancer in my family, unfortunately, where that didn't go so well. I then actually thought it would be a meaningful thing and also an exciting thing to help bring meaningful healthcare innovation to sort of the health systems out there, and make my modest contribution towards that. So that's pretty much what I'm excited about. That's what you could almost say, dedicated the second half of my career to, and therefore I'm extremely grateful and happy that I can spend pretty much 100% of my time on this topic, Barry.
Excellent. I mean, that's a great story, and obviously very sorry to hear about the loss of your father, but we experience this, I think, frequently, where that's quite a motivating force to get involved in healthcare and to take a leading role in driving innovation in healthcare. So Tobias, looking at healthcare overall, what are some of the big challenges? I mean, what's wrong with the system we have right now? We've got great hospitals, we've got great doctors, we've got enormously capable emergency medicine, we have primary care in many countries around the world. All of this, one could argue, is pretty good, and it's an enormous advance on whatever we've had before.
Yeah, absolutely. And, given the COVID crisis and seeing how people, in the UK, how people in Germany and frankly, pretty much every country in the world, how nurses, how doctors, administrative personnel are stepping up to sort of battle this pandemic and help people. It's just nothing short of amazing, and I'm very grateful for that also from personal experience and experience in my family. The topics that I usually focus on, Barry, is sort of the 10-year out kind of topics, right? And there I think that despite having in many countries health systems that work pretty well, there are now enormous opportunities coming up. I guess if we look at the next 10 years from a health system perspective, right, we've got 4 components where most health systems then have now the opportunity to think about how they want to bring those 4 components together for a better health system for the future. And component 1 is the thousands of medical interventions that have been there, right, for many, many years, right?
Yes.
The traditional interventions, you could say. Those interventions now are complemented by the second component, which is, you could say, 30, 50 plus digital health interventions that come on top: teleconsultations, patient remote monitoring, clinical decision support, etc. And then finally, we've got 2 more components. The third one is how to bring in health and well-being much more into health systems, right? Like how do people, especially citizens who I wouldn't classify as patients, right?
Yes.
How do they deal with sleep, nutrition, fitness, stress management, and be happy, healthy individuals instead of us waiting for them to get sick and then spending enormous amount of health system resources to try to get them healthy again? Exactly. And then the fourth dimension is the whole genomics and multi-omics angle, where then it's like, what do we do with our gene sequences or transcriptomics profiles or proteomics profiles, etc.? And are we actually using them for healthcare, or are we mainly using them for research as we do now? Right? And of course, then are countries like Denmark who are thinking about their National Genome Center, how to bring then sequencing laboratories, biobanks, supercomputers, layers of clinical decision support, so that then Danish doctors can interrogate the genome sequences of Danish citizens and do something positive about it. Right? Yeah. These are then things that I find very meaningful to think through how we fit them together. Right? And then finally, if we go into a direction like that, of course, that is then helping people to change their behavior, right, more proactively than maybe today, right? Because they might have better information at their fingertips. They might have more nudges that nudge them in the way of better behavior, and that ultimately then drives, of course, 30 to 50% of health outcomes, as it was shown.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's huge, isn't it? Often it comes up in conversations that we have with leading experts like yourself. Of course, you have things like hospitals, which were developed a long, long time ago to deal with acute problems, but that's no longer necessarily the biggest challenge in society, is it? We have rapidly expanding challenges with long-term chronic conditions, which aren't suitable for being addressed by way of hospitals and this type of thing. So what are examples of projects that you guys are working on? Don't want you necessarily to divulge any secrets or proprietary stuff from McKinsey, but do you want to give us some practical examples? And what I'm thinking of in particular, Tobias, is we have enormous influx of innovation in healthcare technology around the world, don't we? And often in English, it's referred to as all the shiny new things. And yet, when we talk to people working in healthcare, they say we don't need infinite delivery of shiny new things. So what's going on with all this innovation, all the money going innovation around the world, all the shiny new things? And what's the relationship between that and people that are delivering healthcare?
Yeah. I think before I go into that, I just want to mention another thing that I find very exciting and also very promising. And that is pretty much thinking about what is the value that health can bring to countries, right? And then more specifically, what is the value that also digital health can bring, right? And
Absolutely.
if we now, since we are in Europe, right, if we look at Europe for a moment, right? Even before the pandemic, poor health of European citizens cost Europe on average about 2.7 trillion US dollars per year. And that's about 15% of GDP in lost economic opportunity, right? And with that, I mean, people who could work but have too much back pain to actually work, right? Or people who could work, but they have such severe chronic illnesses that they can only work, for example, partially, right? That's a bit what I mean. And that's an equivalent if we sort of, if we look at that from a per person perspective, that's about $5,000, right? Euro is not too much different per person if we look at that from the European Union.
That's huge.
Perspective, right? And if we then look at what diseases are driving this massive 2.7 trillion cost of poor health, it's number one, musculoskeletal disorders, right? Like literally back pain and neck pain, and they account for about a quarter of the total economic loss from poor health. Then the next category is mental health disorders, right? Depression, anxiety. They account for about 20% of it. And then neurological disorders like migraine, headache, and stuff like that, a little bit less than 15%, right?
Okay.
And if we then look at how could we actually reduce this health burden, right? Or how could we actually help European citizens to live healthier, happier lives than what some of them are leading today, right? Even if we would just properly implement the current healthcare interventions that are available, right? The disease burden or the health burden could be reduced by about 30% within the next 2 decades.
Okay.
That 30%, that would literally mean, if you sort of just do the overall calculation, right, that sort of a 65-year-old in 2040 would be as healthy on average as a 55-year-old today, right? So it would be a 10-year impact.
Yes.
Right? In terms of people being alive in 2040, that could be 11 million more people if you just do the health economic calculation, right? Of course, then one thinks about where does this opportunity lie, right? And most of it is health promotion, prevention, health literacy, healthier environments, right? A lot of that has to do with nutrition, with smoking, with chronic diseases, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's what I'm most excited about, right? And of course, then the economists are then also excited about if you would translate these health improvements into then economic benefit.
Sure.
Right? Even the European GDP could grow by 2.4 trillion by the year 2040. That would be a 10% boost above projections that are not in such a sort of healthy scenario, right? And to put it the other way around, every euro that is invested in health in that kind of way, health promotion, right, healthy environments, that we can return sort of 3 to 4 euros in return, right? So that's what I'm most excited about in the terms of the fundamentals, right?
No, it's a good point, Tobias. This is huge.
Right, and then the question becomes, can digital health also play a positive contribution, right? Since many of the innovators that come up with shiny new objects are actually digital health innovators or health data innovators, right? And I think then why I am, and I also lead a health and well-being program for McKinsey Germany for a few thousand people, right? Why I'm positive about digital health is less about the financials, but more that digital health actually helps people, citizens, patients, employees, right? Also in my personal experience, help change behavior, right? And that's Now that doesn't sound very grandiose, right? But I think that's a huge thing, right?
Absolutely.
And if we look at different countries, right, people spend about, depending on which country you look at, right, 10 to 15 minutes on average with their doctor, right? And I would argue, if I just look at myself, I would argue I'm a pretty motivated patient, right? But I can't change my behavior sustainably within 10 or 15 minutes, right? It's just not going to work, right? And if we then look at what we discussed a bit earlier, Barry, that 30 to 50% of health outcomes are driven by behavior change, then that's where I think there is quite some promise that digital can help us change our behaviors more sustainably and actually get towards that elusive behavior change that on the one hand can keep citizens happier and healthier, right?
Yes.
If we look at nutrition, sleep, stress management, fitness, but also help then the chronic patients that you mentioned, Barry, right, that they can better deal with their disease than otherwise.
No, Tobias, that's a very, very interesting point. So I can see what you're explaining regarding the potential value of digital solutions. How does that work within McKinsey? What's this internal McKinsey Health initiative that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's pretty much, you could look at it as a health and well-being initiative, right? So I'm the person leading it for Germany and Austria, so a few thousand employees in this sort of segment. And we then pretty much say, how can health and well-being solutions help you be sort of a happier, more balanced person, etc.
Yes.
So in that sense, we usually look at things like sleep, we look at nutrition, we look at fitness, and we look at stress management, right? And since I, as a biochemist and researcher, I actually prefer the notion of keeping people happy and healthy instead of letting them slide into disease and then spending enormous amounts of resources to getting them healthy again. But I've just seen that looking at those things, ideally also combined, right? Within our own program, we call it a multi-dimensional offering, right? An offering that addresses sleep, nutrition, fitness, and stress management instead of an offering that only addresses one thing.
Okay.
Right? We also have those, right? So if there is a person who says, I want to work on my sleep, right, we will then also have something that then is very sleep focused, right? And if a person says, I'm mostly interested in fitness, we then also have something that is sort of fitness related, right?
Okay.
The programs that I like most and that within our employee cohort are also get the highest ratings are the ones that are these multi-dimensional programs, and they usually include three things, Barry. They usually include sort of a coaching component. They usually then include a digital health component, like an app, and often they also include a wearables component, right? And people see, right, various things, right? So for example, I personally I like 5-6 things, right? I like to see how many steps did I do per day, right? And I try to do between 10 and 15,000 steps per day.
Nice.
And by the way, that's quite easy when you do 1 or 2 calls just by walking. In our age of Zoom. I also like to know sort of how much I slept and how much of that was deep sleep. I also find it helpful to know what is my heart rate during the sleep, right? And does it go down to where it can go down? Or,
sure.
For example, do I have an infection and that keeps my heart rate 10 beats higher, right? Or also 3 glasses of wine have a similar effect on my heart rate.
Excellent.
So in that sense, it's a little bit like driving a car.
Okay.
Right? I like to know how I'm doing versus the speed limit. I also like to know how much petrol I've got in the tank. I also like to know, do I need to go to sort of the maintenance?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that that I always behave right in the most rational way. Because both in terms of my life and in terms of driving, right? But I
Yes.
find it was helpful information to then
Absolutely. Yes. But this is the challenge, isn't it? So I don't want to accuse you, Tobias, of being the so-called worried well, but you're obviously a superb example of, I think, what's referred to as the quantified self. You are, of course, exceedingly intellectually motivated and ambitious to know all these things about yourself. However, is that scalable across society? Or, for example, what's your experience within the McKinsey ecosystem?
Yeah, I would say it's like often in life, right? There is no sort of black and white thing. There is no one size fits all, right? Everyone is an individual, right? And usually, I think about different customer groups when I look at the cohort of employees that I serve with health and well-being related things. There is sort of there are mainly 4 different groups that I've encountered, right? There is the group of people who feel that they should be doing something about their health, right? Or maybe people who have gained a few kilos over the last few years, right? And they still sort of have that in their mind that maybe, they can go back.
Yes.
Then there is the group who is a bit like the biohackers, quantified self people who say, oh, if I do this and this, then sort of maybe I'm a better version of myself.
Yes.
Then there's the third group, and I'm personally in the third group, who then says, I just want to be happier, right? And I found this incredibly helpful from just a happiness, or you could also say it's stress management perspective, Barry.
Okay.
Right? To then know a few things and then be able to behave accordingly, right? So
nice.
Despite being a biochemist and immunologist, Barry, I didn't really know before that sleep deprivation is directly correlated with anxiety.
Wow.
I also didn't know before that being immobile is pretty much triggering anxious or depressive thoughts, right? So, there are various publications out there, but some of our coaches are pretty much saying like that if you move less than 5,000 steps a day, you are pretty much contributing towards your anxiety and depression by being immobile, right? So in that sense, if we look at that, right, and then say how many of us don't know these things, right? And that gets us to health literacy and digital health literacy, which I think we should also briefly talk about if we have time.
Yes.
But that is huge, right? How many days and nights in my life have I not known that, and then just sort of stayed awake and sort of down prioritize sleep, not knowing about the effects that will have for me on the next day, right? It doesn't mean now that I know this that I always be like rational, right? But it's just something that I factor in, right? And now I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if you take me 7 years ago, right, I would have said, oh, I do everything else, right, and then I sleep as much time is left, right? For me, sleep was like priority number.
Exactly.
Today, sleep is still not priority number 1, right? But I would say it's priority number 3, but not anymore priority number 30. Anyway, so that's a little bit what I think is fascinating from my perspective. And if we think about it, right, how many people know better how their car works than how their body works, right? It's mind-blowing.
Very good point. Yeah, exactly. So this digital health relationship with health literacy that you just mentioned, what is health literacy? Is that something that can be measured? And do you believe that that's something that can actually be, how do you say it, adjusted across a large-scale population?
Well, I think that's an interesting thought, Barry. right, and usually in our societies, what gets measured is often getting managed, and what is getting managed is then, at least in some cases, being improved.
Sure.
So I guess when we look at health literacy in general, right, then a high part of the society, when I look at surveys and academic papers, right, doesn't really know or hasn't been sort of educated about health and what that means for them.
Yes.
So I think that's the general thing, right? And then the other part that is then now confounding and sometimes even exacerbating it is the digital health literacy topic, right? Where then, if we take recent surveys in my home country, Germany, right? Let's say not everyone knows about the electronic patient record. Not everyone knows about the new e-prescription, right? And then knowing means awareness, right? But it still in many cases doesn't mean that people are aware of what is the benefit for them.
Right.
And for the new EHealth Monitor Germany, which is that annual report that we publish, the next one will come out in November. We are currently looking at digital health evidence and in particular evidence for benefit, right? And we've done an analysis of the last 3 years of sort of digital health related publications for Germany, and we looked at how many of them are looking at the benefits of digital health. And then of those that actually show benefits, right? By the way, it's 85% roughly of publications that try to quantify the benefit of digital health that then actually show that there is a benefit, right? And if we then look at the ones that come to the positive benefit and look at what kind of benefit was shown, right? They usually fall in 3 categories. The first category is patient benefit, right? Like people losing weight or diabetics being able to control their blood glucose better.
Yes.
Or people being sort of hospitalized less than before. But then the second benefit is cost savings, and the third benefit is time saving, right? And time saving usually in relation to nurses and doctors, right? So most of the publications that we've just analyzed for the last 3 years in Germany, I think about 75 to 80% of the ones that show a benefit are actually showing a patient benefit, right? And then the remaining 20-ish% show then that cost saving or time saving benefit.
Yes.
Right? And that is something that I find the most exciting chapter of all in that eHealth Monitor, right? Where it's like, okay, can we prove and what kind of benefit is there from digital health that then translates into patient benefit? And that then, especially for those chronic disease populations, can also then drive these behavior changes where digital health is pretty well suited, in my point of view, right? Like gamification, digital therapeutics, that's often then approaches that help people manage their health, and they are often more like nudging or games, right? Where it's not about, oh, Tobias, you've got that serious disease and it's all terrible and now you need to be really sensible, right? It's more that, oh, this is a really fun thing to do and it also helps your health, right? That's things that I think could benefit. And that could then also, if we now talk about from the innovators and technology perspective, Barry, that could then also help with scaling. Right? If I look at what is the population of diabetics, what is the population of people with multiple sclerosis, what is the percent of people with rheumatoid arthritis or asthma or COPD, right? Then in many of those populations, the digital health adoption, at least in Germany, is still single-digit percentages, right? Only multiple sclerosis. That's an interesting thing to look into more detail to then find out why, right? multiple sclerosis is the patient population in Germany that is sort of the most digital health savvy, and then the others are still sort of single digits.
Oh, wow. So there's a very, very long way to go in terms of the
absolutely.
penetration, so to speak. But that's interesting because, of course, obviously, there's been dramatic penetration of basic technologies in the past 100 years, from zero to billions of automobiles on the road, and from zero to billions of handsets in people's hands around the world, to cloud, which is infinitely scalable at very low cost. So there's some, if you will, basic infrastructure components that are in place now, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess then also the question is sort of, what do citizens do or use, and what do patients use, right? I lead the Health Tech Network, which is that global network of now almost 1,000 digital health companies, where I do the quarterly CEO roundtables, and as part of that, I of course often then speak with the health tech CEOs. And I really like what one of the CEOs told me last week. He said, "Look, we need to be thinking more about what should citizens be using and what is helpful for citizens in managing their health and well-being,
right?
Instead of thinking about what do patients use, right?" So
that's a very
I liked his analogy. He said, scales are not only for people who are seriously overweight, right? And maybe continuous glucose monitors should not only be for people who are diabetics, right? So in that sense, of course, this is now something that is just sort of his quote and his view, right? But at the end of the day, I'm quite hopeful that if we as a society would increase, on the one hand, health literacy, on the other hand, digital health literacy, right, that would be also based on these health economic numbers that I quoted at 20 minutes, that could actually be a positive case for a country.
That's a very interesting point. I haven't heard that before, but the health of citizens, or the needs of citizens, as opposed to the health and needs of patients, is quite a profound, subtle but profound change. And I think that's a perfect illustration of the requirement to move societies at large to well-being, rather than to what we have right now, which obviously is sick care. It's not health care. A vast majority of people obviously only contact the doctor when they're unwell. So that's sick care, isn't it? And I guess a core element of all healthcare delivery right now is sick care. But that's the problem. So the citizens instead of patients theme is extremely interesting. Well, Tobias, I'd love to chat about that. Maybe what we could do is have another episode looking at that alone, because unfortunately we're kind of running out of time right now. But this has been unbelievably interesting and valuable. And some of the huge statistics that you've quoted about the cost, for example, to European society of healthcare issues, many of them probably addressable, and not necessarily things that people are stuck with, but things that people could change should they wish to change them. Very, very interesting. Could we just summarize a little bit very briefly about the EHealth Monitor that you guys publish? What is that, and how can people learn more about that?
Yeah, so thanks for asking, Barry. The EHealth Monitor was pretty much an idea that we and others had 2 years ago, since there were lots of surveys and analyses and publications about e-health coming out in Germany almost on a weekly basis. And we then felt, wouldn't it be nice to have a bit of an overview? Where does the digitization of the German health system stand overall, right? And with overall, I mean looking at the regulatory framework, the infrastructure, the offering in terms of digital health, the acceptance, the use, and then we come back to the digital health literacy, Barry, as well as then what is the evidence for the benefit, right? Because ultimately we felt that evidence for benefit will drive acceptance, and acceptance will drive usage, right? And that's then also the adoption and the scaling topic that many European countries have related to digital health. But to cut a long story short, we then said, well, if no one else has done it, why don't we then publish such an EHealth Monitor annually, right? The first one came out in November last year. And then then it was also picked up by a German publishing house, and they felt that it was interesting. So the second one will come out this November. We are just in the final stages. It will now be as a real book. The focus chapter this year will be the digital therapeutics or DIGA applications in the German market. How have they been doing? We'll also have a contribution article by the BfArM, the German regulatory authority. Some of the people from the BfArM will give an interview how it was for them looking at DIGAs for a year. So should be some interesting pieces in there, and it will come out in November.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Tobias. It sounds extremely interesting. Where can people go to find out more information about that? Is that available on your website?
If people, if there are questions also on some of the things I said, people can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and I'm happy to point them to the right place.
Okay, perfect. Well, what we'll do is we'll make sure that all of those links are at the bottom of the YouTube channel for this episode.
Great,
very good. Look, Tobias, I would absolutely love to continue this conversation with you, but I apologize. We've run out of time. This has been unbelievably interesting and informative. We're grateful, obviously, for your time and all of the incredibly insightful pieces of information and ideas that you have shared with us. So thank you very much. Once again, this has been Tobias Silberzahn from McKinsey. We're grateful for your sponsorship of the GIANT Health event as well. Looking forward to seeing you on stage at the GIANT Health event in the 30th of November as well. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you. Looking forward, Barry.
Excellent. Once again, my name is Barry Shrier. I have been your host of this week's episode of GIANT Healthy Innovators Live TV. If you want to learn more, please go to the GIANT website, www.giant.health. We also ask everybody who's looking at these episodes to subscribe to our channel, which helps us to continue building up our global community of everybody who's passionately involved in supporting innovation in healthcare to improve patient outcomes. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Vodafone and Barclays Bank, and our knowledge partner, McKinsey & Co. We love working with you guys, so thank you very much for your generous support. Likewise, looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you again, Tobias. All the best.
Take care. Thank you.